Hey guys, what is up? It is me, Pagey, here once again with another review or another video on Stargirl Season 2, which will be my review for episode 12 for this season, otherwise entitled Summer School Chapter 12, the penultimate episode, the second last episode of the season. So of course, spoiler for what's going to be going on in this video. I'm going to be talking about anything and everything, I guess, that happens throughout the episode and what's set up for next week's finale. So yeah, go away if you're not watching the episode. But of course, if you have watched the episode, be sure to let me know in the comments section down below your general thoughts and opinions on this episode, as well as your theories and predictions heading into next week's finale. Because, yeah, this definitely laid out the groundwork, if you want to call it, for what's happening next week. But of course, last week's episode, elephant in the room, didn't do a review. If you watch my trailer breakdown, you know why. Basically, power was out. I was in the Shadowlands myself for God knows how many hours, so just sort of cancelled out a review happening, unfortunately, but we're back this week. But last episode we had Courtney in Courtney in the Shadowlands, but fast forward to the end, we have Courtney, Dr. McNider, and Cindy Berman getting out of the Shadowlands, and Cindy becomes like an ally against Eclipso. So we got a new team member, question mark or in quotation marks for this episode and also the finale. But also towards the end, the Shade dies. Question mark, and I'll just include it here because I won't really talk about it in the episode. There is a point in this episode where Barbara sort of hears the Shade. So just sort of saying like, hey, he's still there. So I'm assuming that we see him maybe make like a triumphant return right at the end against Eclipso next week. So I'll just mention that here. So, because I didn't really write it down in my notes too much. But in regards to this episode as a whole, this episode was a true part one of a two-part finale where we got all of our our ducks in a row, just to put the general saying out there. We got all of our ducks in a row for the finale next week, with also like a twinkle of mystery laid out in a few areas to keep us guessing what is really coming our way. But I think it was a pretty straightforward episode, where, as I said, just laid all the ducks out in a row and got everything, organized that needed to be organized. I'm sort of questioning whether it was rushed. I don't think it was. Maybe in like one or two areas, but I don't think we'll know whether it's rushed until next week with the finale. I think that'll be the deciding factor, because you can't really tell just based off this episode whether it's rushed or not. But yeah, let's just talk about the specifics of this episode and break it down. So in this episode, we start with like an empty and eerie and spooky Whitmore Dugan household. It's like the perfect arena for the scariest of things to happen, and this happens to be the best alone day ever for Max the dog. Like, he goes crazy. But along with this, the cosmic stuff is back online. And at first I was like, is it activated via dog urine? Or I don't know. But this is all done to I'm Too Sexy by Right Said Fred. So I don't know. Is that the dog's favorite song? I'm not too sure. But I mean, that's one way to kick off an episode where it looked like it was going to be a bit spooky. But we then do actually, flashback 4 hours earlier to Blue Valley High with Beth and Jenny there, and they're returning to the scene of the fight from episode 6, where, of course, Eclipso first emerged, Isaac Bohm was killed, Artemis yeeted out of there, just bailed, and, of course, Cindy was sent to the Shadowlands. And we actually learn it's only been a week, roughly, since that fight, apparently, so not too long ago. I thought that it would have been much longer, but I guess that just means it just shows how much stuff's been going on in Blue Valley within a week period. So this season as a whole isn't actually over a crazy amount of time. I guess it's only meant to be over the summer period or the summer holidays, but aren't the summer holidays in America like a good few months or something? Like, aren't they like pretty extensive? So yeah, I guess this season of Stargirl isn't actually taking up too much of the summer period. So yeah. But we learned that they were actually led to the cafeteria area from the Green Lantern ring, where they actually do find some residue that's left by Eclipso, which the ring attacks to sort of trace it again, but the residue actually leaps into Jenny's ring. So this, I guess, at the time I was thinking, okay, is this like Eclipso taking over Jenny? It doesn't end up being that, but it's like Eclipso influencing Jenny, I think, is the best way to put it, but we'll talk about that later in the video. Now, it was good to see Dr. McNider, or, the original Dr. Midnight, return to the normal world, get back into his normal thing. And of course, he finds a suit comfortable, which I guess some people would find a suit comfortable, or at least comfortable in a comfort way, like something that's normal. I guess it's better than being in the Dr. Midnight suit for God knows how many years. But we have himself and Pat discussing a plan of attack against Eclipso, with the plan centering around light versus dark, which will differ from what is laid out by Cindy later in the episode. So it'll be interesting to see which plan works, because you got two members of the former JSA who, they dealt with the situation by tapping into the darkness, but they're saying to center the plan around light versus dark. So which way is it going to work? I guess we'll find out next week in the finale. But it's interesting to see the two different plans of attack. Light versus dark from the old JSA side, but Cindy sort of coming in with no, you got to fight the dark with the dark. So yeah, but we'll discuss that later in the video in regards to that. But it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out next week. But speaking of Cindy, Beth finds out that Cindy is helping the team, which I guess is a bit confronting to say the least. But more importantly, she gets to meet Dr. McNider in the flesh, where they are able to actually combine their goggles and the power and the processing power behind them to speed up the search for Eclipso. So, yeah, this helps just basically to get to the end of the episode a bit faster, because 8 hours is a lot of time, but 4 hours is, of course, half the time. So obviously I think it's a bit of an advantage in regards to that. But obviously they both have their own set of goggles. So this is like I know there's a conversation around like whether Dr. Midnight's goggles in the Shadowlands were real, if you know what I mean. Or at least when he came out, they would still work. But of course we now know there's going to be two sets. So Beth can, doesn't have to either hand them back or there has to be a fight over them or anything like that. It's not like the Cosmic Stuff where there's only one. We have two sets of goggles. So Beth's all good in regards to that. Now, of course, we've had the issues in Blue Valley going on where there's just been weird stuff going on revolving, pink lightning and food appearing. So Mike's out in Blue Valley on the lookout for the Thunderbolt pen, with all the radio stuff going on, which is sort of updating with all the weird stuff that's going on. And he finds a big burger, a really big burger. But along with that, he also finds the newspaper bag of Jakeem Williams. So Mike now has a lead on who has the pen possibly, and that is when we actually have Mike finding Jakeem with the pen, who is hungry all the time apparently, but he's also just like, he's definitely not tapped in as much in regards to how quick Mike was with the pen. So it's like, when like Mike said it should be in better hands, it's actually ended up in sort of like worse hands in regards to Jakeem, just because he doesn't have a proper grip on it at the moment. But you never know when like Jakeem probably understands the pen and what to do with it, he could be a master with it. So that's for us to wait and find out. They just sort of planted the seed in this episode in regards to all of that. Now, it wouldn't be a Stargirl episode if there wasn't some tension. So Courtney goes to find Yolanda to tell her all the information that she has gained since Yolanda left the group, because there really has been no communication at all. But it doesn't really help at all, as it just makes Yolanda think worse of the JSA and the Wildcat mantle and pushes her further away, because they're just a group of murderers now. It's not just like Yolanda who's the murderer, they're all murderers. But Cindy is watching this go on, and I thought when we then see Cindy arrive at Yolanda's house, get through the window in a very like Catwoman sort of pose, she was going to be like compassionate and tell her how much the team needs her. But instead she doesn't 100% do the opposite, but sort of does the opposite, hoping that Yolanda doesn't come back. It'll make her job easier. And she goes to tap into Yolanda's dark side, revealing that she was the one who sent the photos around school, which we knew, like, she did, but Yolanda didn't. She's still in the mind frame of that, Henry did and everything like that. So, it sort of like was a bit of a twist there in regards to Cindy. I didn't think she'd do that exactly, but does it work? We'll find out. Now, one of the more surprising bits in this episode was when we have Pat going to see Rick's uncle in the hospital, in order to ask him to drop any charges that he has against Rick following the incident from a few episodes ago. But that doesn't go Pat's way, with Rick's uncle telling him to go to hell. But Pat serves it back, letting him know just how much of a piece of work he is, while also us seeing a darker and more ruthless side to Pat as he makes that conversation in the hospital even more private, and we don't see what happens. We just know the end result. So what is Pat doing there? He references the army, and I wanted to see what happens there. At least hear some audio. Like, I know that it's a bit of a tease, but man, it just shows like a more dark and ruthless side of Pat. Pat's not a pushover. If he needs to get stuff done, he will get it done. Yeah, I mean, that sort of threw me for a loop, but I sort of wanted to see it at the same time. Now, Courtney does open up to Barbara about her interactions with the Shadowlands version of Barbara from last episode, including how the Shadowlands Barbara talked about giving up her life for Courtney, and any ambitions she had were thrown away in order to raise Courtney. And while Barbara is like, well, yeah, of course she made some sacrifices, it was all worth it for Courtney. And of course, that's pretty much the case with a lot of parents, especially parents at a young age or single parents, which is the case for Barbara. So obviously it's just baggage that, Courtney thought that she had given to her mother and stuff, which made Courtney feel guilty. But that's always going to happen, in a lot of different circumstances. Like, it's pretty rare that there's parents that aren't sort of disadvantaged in some way when they have kids, but at the end, it's a part of life. It's a part of life, and at the end, in most cases, it's worth it because you get to actually raise the kid, and you get to see what you created, if you know what I mean. So obviously, Courtney was struggling with this mentally, but for Barbara, she's like, hey, don't worry about it. Like, everyone has to make sacrifices. Could be for your kid, could be to get 100% on an exam or something. There's always sacrifices in life. And speaking of sacrifices in life, Mike is sacrificing more of his time as he then, carries on from finding education and sort of explains what happened to himself and the Thunderbolt in actually it was right towards the beginning of the season, wasn't it? So it was like episode 3 or 4, and explains what happened before it actually got to Jakeem. And I must say, Jakeem has got a bitching room for a teenager. It's massive. It's a big room. I mean, Jesus Christ. But anyway, he's got a kick-ass room for a teenager. But even though he has a kick-ass room, he still has to do the dishes. And I thought it was funny that when we then saw like a quick scene with them actually doing the dishes, it's Mike doing the dishes and Jakeem's just sort of like slowly like drying the dishes. So yeah, maybe that's the deal. Like, hey, I'll let you know everything about the Thunderbolt, but can you do the washing, please? And I don't want to get my hands wet. Now, Yolanda does go to Courtney's house, so Cindy's stuff worked, where she does confront Courtney about the decision to bring Cindy into the team against Eclipso, and she does agree to help, but only for this mission. And after that, she's all gone. But of course, this means, as I said, that Cindy's plan works. And this also sort of like spurs Cindy into a motivation speech, if you want to call it, for Courtney, where she says that Courtney has to tap into her darkness as well against Eclipso in order to win. Yolanda's doing that, and it shows in her, when she fights people. And they have to tap into the darkness just like how the old JSA did. And this is what I was talking about before, where it's sort of conflicting what Pat and Dr. McKnight have planned with the whole light versus dark. So what's going to prevail? Because something's set up in the end of this episode where it makes you think, is tapping into the darkness what we need to do? Because maybe tapping into the light is what needs to happen. And this is when we see Jenny having nightmare visions, courtesy of Eclipso, that show the new JSA dead around Blue Valley. Pat's dead, Yolanda's dead. I think those are the only two we saw at that stage. But they're dead around Blue Valley, so something's gone wrong. But speaking of Pat, whatever he did in that hospital room with Rick's uncle worked, as Rick is released from jail. But, of course, it's important to remember, when, that whole incident with Rick happened, and before he went to, to jail, he broke the hourglass. So he needs to do some work in order to get back to being Owlman. He's reading his dad's notebook. I don't know how quick that will happen. I do wonder whether Owlman or Rick will be even useful in the finale. Just because it seems like they're going pretty fast, but I don't know, maybe they can come up with a quick solution. I don't know, we'll have to wait and see what happens there, but they've got to get that going. I bet Rick's regretting smashing the hourglass now. Now, Cindy does ring someone on the phone. This is like just a sort of like a seed being planted for next week, but Cindy does ring someone on her phone, telling them to come back to Blue Valley, straight away and as fast as possible, but there's no hint as to who it is. And the only person I could think of as to who it is Artemis, because Isaac Bowen is dead and Artemis bailed, and we haven't seen Artemis since she bailed. So I'm thinking it's Artemis. It's the only person I can think of, unless it's like another person from the ISA from last season, or it could be like Sportsmaster and Tigers, but I just think it's Artemis. I don't think it could be anyone else but her. But we'll have to wait and see. But my prediction is Artemis because it's the only person I could think of. But to finish off the episode, Beth and Dr. McKnight go to the American Dream in order to sort of access the ISA's area. But Eclipso is waiting there as well in his Bruce Gordon or the young Bruce Gordon form. But of course, through the goggles of both Dr. McKnight and Beth, they can just see Eclipso there. It reveals all. But that's not all that's being revealed, because Eclipso actually reveals his plan where Courtney is his new host. And it's about sort of tapping into that whole darkness thing and bringing the darkness out within Courtney. And she was actually the one who killed all the JSA members in Jenny's nightmare visions. Eclipso controlled Courtney, was the killer. That's the whole plan that's going on. Whoa. Will it happen? That's the big question. Are they going to actually have this issue where Courtney is taken over by Eclipso? And as I said, it sort of makes you realize that Cindy's plan is not the plan to go with, because it's actually playing into what Eclipso wants to do. Whether Cindy knows that or not is another question. I don't know if that would be the case. I highly doubt it, but you never know. So, yeah, hopefully someone gets the memo out there quickly. But I don't know, the clock is ticking. I don't know if Beth and Dr. McNider will be able to do that because they're together. If they were separate, if it was like Beth there and Dr. McNider at the household and stuff, they could communicate, but they're together. So getting that communication out there is going to be a bit difficult. But yeah, as I said, this episode, it's just a true part one of a two-part finale. Just laid everything out. Nothing ridiculously major happened. It was all minor stuff, which then leads to the major stuff next week. And, you know, maybe if this episode was called, you know, something something part one, you know, as in like a finale part one, it might not sort of seem disappointing to people. I don't think it was necessarily a disappointing episode because to me, I know it's meant to be a part one of a two-part finale. So I enjoyed it for what it was, but it wasn't like any sort of like mind-blowing thing outside of that reveal towards the end, which we don't know whether it's even going to get close to happening until we actually get to see next week's finale. But I still enjoyed the episode and what it did and what it set up. And I can't wait to see how this season ends and just what the final fight against Eclipso is like because, you know, it seems like they've been holding back this season to potentially go a bit crazy next week. We also saw Stripe the robot being finished off as well, so I'd assume he's going to be out and about next week because Eclipso is actually going to be using proper force, so there's actually a need to use Stripe. So yeah, let's see what happens next week, but I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, it'd be awesome if you could drop a like on it, show support. Let me know in the comment section down below your general thoughts, opinions, theories, everything like that from this episode and leading into next week's finale. Always curious to read them. And of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and I will catch you guys later. Goodbye.